Welcome in, everybody, to Grind Time, powered by Full Time Fantasy and the FFWC. I am joined tonight by one of the world's best high-stakes fantasy football players, Glenn Lowy. And Glenn has quite the resume. His resume includes FFWC main event overall championship, runner-up in the FFPC and the NFFC main event overall championship. He's won the NFFC Platinum. It's a $20,000 buy-in. That's $150,000 in winnings in a single league. Back-to-back wins in the FFPC High Society. That's a $10,000 buy-in league. So that's a $50,000 payout for first. He did get, top two seeds in that as well for another 10 grand. And he's won 3 of the last 5 NYC Supers. So quite the resume, Glenn. I want to say thanks for joining the show. Thanks for taking the time. And welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Watching some playoff football and enjoying it. Some weekend this past weekend, some great games.
Yeah, my Niners have made it thus far, so I'm excited. I called an upset last week, and I definitely think Vegas has it pretty even. I think the line moved 3.5 this week. It was 3 for the Rams, so I still think the Niners have a pretty damn good shot to go to the Super Bowl again. What do you think?
They definitely have a shot. They've got a great coach and a solid defense and great running game and some real playmakers. I think it's going to come down to Garoppolo and whether he can step up at those times he needs to, which is to me a coin flip. He's not the most he's not the quarterback that inspires the most confidence, but he has had some big games, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think he's a step up. I just think he doesn't have to make an error, right? Like he just can't be throwing the ball away in the second, third quarter like he has been the last couple games and giving it up on their side of the field and giving teams an easy chance to score. I think if he's able to just minimize or reduce the turnovers and just manage this game and let Debo and the defense carry, I think they have a real good shot.
Yeah, let's face it. There's been quarterbacks in the past that have won Super Bowls that haven't been the Aaron Rodgers or the Patrick Mahomes types, Dilfer and guys along those lines. And Garoppolo, he can do it. I think Stafford might have a little bit of an edge on him, and the Rams, they're playing very, very well. But that San Francisco defense and that coach and that running game, you never know what could happen.
All right, so enough about playoffs, as I could sit here and talk Niners all day, but the people are here for you. The people are here to listen to high-stakes fantasy football success, and we brought you on so you could talk about your process, your preseason process, your in-season process, your postseason process, and what does that entail? So a couple questions here I want to start with is one, most importantly, when do you start drafting? Right? Everyone has a different philosophy. Some wait till August. Some like me are sickos and they're already drafting right now for next year. When does Glenn Lowy's process start, and what does it entail?
Glenn Lowy.
But, I'm sorry. Oh my God, I did it.
It's all right. It's quite all right. But I've for the past dozen years or so since I've been in high stakes, I always start my draft season with the same league. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's got a little bit of a name out there. It's called Trendsetters. It was started back, I think, in 2008 or 2009 by a group of high-profile NFFC players. Quite a roster of accomplished players, and they start the minute the Super Bowl ends. That's the start of the draft. It's a slow draft. It goes 5 rounds a phase. Each phase is about 3 weeks apart. It's a lot of fun, this draft. And the reason they called it Trendsetters at the beginning is back when that league first came about, and I joined the second or third year, but back when that league came about, nobody was drafting now. Another draft that I was in way back then was called Genesis. It was an FFPC first draft, and that was in May. So you had a real off season back in the day in high stakes. Now people are drafting, before the playoffs are over. It's a different world in high stakes drafting, and they're even drafting overall contests. The FFPC has their what do they call it? The pre-draft contest that's going on right now, best ball. For me, that's not really the way I go about it. I need a little time to decompress from the season. I do enjoy trendsetters. I've been in there, like I said, a decade or so now, and I've won a couple times. And it's a draft I really enjoy, and it's very challenging. But I do need a little bit of time off from the season to both decompress and to digest the season. Get my thoughts around it a little bit, whether I had a successful season or not, and what my expectations are for next year.
Okay, great process. There's a couple questions that we have in the chat. I'm going to get to those shortly as they kind of pertain to the topic. So I see your question in there, Scott, for the champ here. And I want to make sure that we get to it, but it's going to go in accordance with the flow of the rest of the questions. So next question I have is, do you create your own rankings or tiers, or do you use certain sites, or how are you, essentially creating your draft sheet?
Well, it's a combination of factors. I don't sit down in the off season and put all the players on a spreadsheet and then rank them per se. I don't draft that way by a ranking sheet either. Every draft is its own living, breathing thing, and how the prior parts of a draft, the earlier rounds, can affect my later rounds. But I think a lot of it has to do with ADP. Now, I don't draft by ADP, but I look for inequities within it, values within it. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that utilize ADP as their draft guide, and I think that's a mistake. But using ADP as a guide of where you can grab values, I think is something that can be a tremendous resource for you, something that I've utilized in the past. And you can find real values, players that you may consider a first round talent that maybe you can get in the third or fourth round and save a lot of draft capital, and do the same in the later rounds. And within that ADP and within the tiers of ADP is where I will rank my players, if you understand what I'm saying. I will look at the first and second round and focus on 2 or 3 players that I really like in those rounds. And that'll be my targets. The third and fourth rounds, the fifth through seventh rounds, and, players that I think are too high, I'll fade, and players that I think are true values, I'll focus on and try to get as often as possible.
I saw that firsthand drafting with you, or against you, I should say, in so many leagues. And I can name one of your targets that you had right off the top of my head, because every time he was on the board in the third round or even the late second, you took him every single time. And that was DeAndre Swift.
Yes.
And I could see it without fail. I said, if I don't take him this turn, he will be gone before he comes back to me, because Glenn will take him. And without doubt, you took him every single time. So how did you identify Swift as one of your target players, and what was that process, and how did that entail?
Well, Swift to me seemed, in the early drafts, again, ADP is a little bit in flux at that point, and you're not really sure where players are going to end up going. I loved him right away. I love the talent. I love the fact that he was a pass catcher. The issues that other drafters had with him were things that I was able to, get past really quickly. The bad team. Hey, let's face it. There's great fantasy players and values that come out of bad teams. The fact that one of his major skill sets was as a pass catching back. Hey, a team that's behind is going to utilize that kind of back more often than a team that's ahead. The changing quarterbacks, Goff had proven to me in the past that he could support a pass catching back. He didn't strike me as a, let her rip gunslinger type quarterback. And he certainly didn't have the weapons to do that with the Detroit pass receiving core. So I just thought Swift would have a major role. And the Jamal Williams, listen, the cream rises to the top. I think Williams is a decent player, a good player, a nice backup. He's not even close to the level of talent that a DeAndre Swift is. So I put it all together. And to me, DeAndre Swift's ceiling was, Eckler or even Kamara. And I saw that ceiling, and I saw a ceiling like that, and I thought it was a probable ceiling. And I saw him going in the second round. I was grabbing him in the second. Then I'd see, I was able to grab him in the late second. I tried to grab him in the third. He was still there. Late third. And by the time the live main events were happening, he was going in the fourth. And, if I'm grabbing him in the early second 2 months early and not much has changed, I'm all over him in the fourth. So I did have quite a bit of DeAndre Swift. And for a long time there, I was really happy about it.
Yeah. So you said something. I just want to chime in. You said that his ceiling could be Eckler or even Kamara. I think one could argue now Kamara's ceiling could be Eckler.
Yeah. It took me a long time to get on board with Eckler. I'm always worried about him. He's one of the guys that I never was on because I just wondered if he could hold up.
Injury concerns were a huge thing. I know.
Yeah, I just he's a smaller type, and I questioned it, but that was a mistake. And we all make mistakes.
We all make mistakes, part of the game. All right, how many drafts do you do a year?
Well, it depends.
Roughly.
This year I did the most drafts I've ever done, and by far, actually. And I did. My wife's not too far from me, so I'm going to whisper. I did 70 drafts, so that's quite a bit for me, and it's honestly probably a little more than I can comfortably manage. So, hey, I love drafting. I could draft 3 times a day, every day if I had the time for it. It's the most enjoyable part of what we do, but you have to remember you have to manage these teams, and I mostly do fab teams. I don't do a lot of best ball. I do the vast majority of my teams are fab oriented, and so there's a lot of managing involved in that, and you've got to have time if you're going to be successful to manage these teams properly. And I think next year, I'm going to be cutting back down to probably where I was before. It'll be more in the 40, 50, maybe a little more than that range. I was able to do that comfortably. This year, I pushed it a little bit. And, I don't have any partners besides my son who helps me a little bit. In the New York drafts, he comes along with me. He's 14. But for the most part, I manage these myself. And 70 was pushing the envelope a little.
Yeah, I everyone has a limit, right? And I think I was fortunate enough to have a draft partner who's even more of a sicko than I am when it comes.
He has no limit. Has no limit. He claims he has a limit of like 1,000, but even that he can blow past.
So luckily, partnership helps a lot, and that man is dedicated. And I thought I was dedicated. He is a whole nother level of dedicated when it comes to fantasy football. So 70 alone is a big number. So draft philosophy, next question, this will kind of tie into a couple questions we have inside the queue. One from Scott is what is your draft philosophy? Zero running back, hero running back. Tell me how, like, your preferred method of draft. And I understand it's not the same in every draft, but what is your preferred draft method or philosophy?
Well, I wouldn't really say I have a preferred method. One of the strengths I think I have that I like about my drafting style personally is that I'm very flexible in drafts. Like I said earlier, I have the guys I'm looking at in the first round, guys I'm looking at in the second round. But some of them are running backs, some of them are wide receivers, depending on the format. Some of them may be tight ends. And I'm going to take typically those kind of targets, my favorite of them, if they're available when it's my turn. And, I'm going to build that way for the first couple rounds. And then I'm going to look at my team and, I'll have players that I like and I have players that I believe in, but they might be 2 running backs. They might be 2 wide receivers. It might be 1 of 1. It might be a tight end. And then from there, then I'll build around that team. And, there's times I go into a draft, I have no particular intent of drafting 4 straight wide receivers, going 0 running back or, limited running back or hero running back or any kind of particular way, but it just works out that way. And then I'll be flexible, and build the rest of my draft around that start, and hopefully build it properly.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common response I get from a lot of high stakes players is flexibility in a draft. I think that's what separates the good drafters from the bad drafters, or those who come in with a quote plan versus those who stick to a plan or may not be able to adjust. And I think that being flexible is probably one of the largest components to a player's success inside of a draft.
Definitely. I mean, all the great players in the listen. When we're drafting high stakes, we're drafting against the best players in the world. Okay, we love our players. There's certain players we like. We're hoping they're there. How many times have we snaked the pick before? You know, how many times do you think these couple rounds will go a certain way and it just doesn't? If you can't be flexible in the draft, if you are locked into a specific game plan and that game plan goes a little awry and you can't adjust, you're dead before the draft's over.
I agree
So
100%.
it's very important to be able to bob and weave during a draft and free agency and in season. And if you don't have that ability, you know, unless everything goes perfectly well for you, you're going to be in trouble.
So speaking of draft philosophy, Scott has a question here. He says, "Hey champ, when do you like to take a quarterback or tight end in FFWC formats? And would you ever want to see the FFWC go to 6 points per passing touchdown? Also kickers, do you support the ban the kicker movement?"
No, I don't support the ban the kicker movement. I get it. To me, it's just a part of fantasy. It wouldn't kill me if contests, you know, got away from the kicker position. I do like team kicker. I think that's a nice little adjustment some contests have made, because there's enough luck in kicking. You don't need your guy getting COVID. Before, and then all of a sudden you have no kicker, because one thing you can't do, or you really don't want to do, is carry two kickers except in the playoffs. And if you can avoid that in the playoffs, you do that. You know, it's a position that you just want the guy. But, you know, keeping that position doesn't bother me at all. As far as quarterback and tight end in the FFWC, unless I'm getting one of the elite, which I do think can give you an edge. You know, you get a Kelsey, you get, you know, a Kittle in a normal year, or a Waller the past couple years. You get a guy like that who can be a difference maker. I think can give you an edge, and I'm willing to take them a little early. But if you're not getting one of those 3, 4, 5 guys, I think it makes sense to wait, because, you know, they kind of lump together then, and you can get such great value on those type of tight ends in the FFWC format, because a lot of people wait on them. You know, you have those other positions you got to fill, with the dual flex and the 3 wide receivers. You really have to focus on those kind of positions, running back and wide receiver. Quarterback, it depends on the quarterback. I've gone quarterback early. I've gone quarterback late. You know, if I see a tremendous value for an elite quarterback, yeah, I'll jump on him. You know, I probably prefer to wait on him, but, you know, value is value. And, you know, a quarterback that's throwing 4 touchdowns and throwing for 400 yards in the fantasy playoffs, you know, can be the game changer. So.
Okay, so we have a couple of other questions in here related to kind of draft philosophy. Scottle said, saw an early FFPC draft and Mooney was taken at 6.12. Knowing we're not in draft mode yet still, does that seem super late to you?
I don't know about late. Again, I don't really have a feel yet for where players should be going. You know, I guess 6 seems about right. Maybe he goes a little earlier. You know, he's not really a proven talent. He's somebody I am somewhat interested in, though, because he's he is explosive, and, you know, he was commanding targets for Chicago last year. That shift from Allen Robinson was a little surprising for me, how poorly Allen Robinson performed this year. But, you know, Mooney picked up a lot of that slack, and he looked very good and very explosive. Fields seems to have chemistry is so important between quarterback and wide receiver, and that chemistry seems to be there. So he's somebody I'm going to be thinking about. You know, I haven't really completely made up my mind, but, you know, if I feel he's a value, he's somebody I'll grab maybe earlier than that.
I got him at 6.11, so one pick earlier than the one that Scott just mentioned. But it seems to be the area he's going in. I think it's a value right now because you look at Allen Robinson probably departing and the targets that were available there, even though he didn't do much in 2021. But there's still going to be some vacated targets. The chemistry that you mentioned goes a long way. So I could see his ADP rising kind of as the season kind of starts kicking off and more drafters get kicked into gear, more into that fifth range, I think, possibly sneak up into fourth at times, but I'm going to say he's probably going to settle in the fifth round.
It wouldn't surprise me. And, fifth round seems to be where those kind of wide receivers who made somewhat of a splash, but people aren't 100% sold on. Fourth, fifth, sixth round, you can find them. And if you pick the right guys, it could be a great season for you.
Okay, so moving on. Do you draft teams different in a confined league versus you would in like a tournament setting or a 10K or a 5K or 20K? Are you approaching the draft in the same manner, or how are you approaching different leagues and different settings differently?
Well, I think for the overall type of leagues, your FFWC main event, FFPC main event, NFFC prime time, the 350s that are out there and such, I think risk goes out the window. You don't worry about it. Floor is meaningless. It's about having the team with the highest ceiling. So if you hit that ceiling, you beat that 1,000 other teams that you're trying to beat when the fantasy playoffs come around. That's what we're all in there for. It's nice to win the league, but you join an overall, your plan is to cash that $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 jack. That's why we're in there. So my focus is as much upside as possible, not reckless upside. I've done that before too, plenty too much.
I think we all have.
But that's got to be the focus. The safe player. They're nice to have, but I'm always going to roll the dice on that guy who maybe, if it comes around, he can be a league winner, a contest winner. In those confined leagues, especially the 5Ks, the 10Ks, the 20Ks we're talking about, that risk has to be mitigated just a little bit. You have to also focus on floor. It's so important to get into the playoffs because there's so much money you make just being in the playoffs. You finish third, you're still making your 10K plus back. You finish top points, you're making 10K back. That's a lot of money.
Yep.
That's a buy-in to another 10K the next year. And if you manage to win, if you get in there, you're not up against 500 other players like you would be in the
11 other guys.
You're in the playoffs against 3 other players. So you don't need that explosive upside. You got to beat 3 players. Okay. You want to get in and you want to have a good enough team to win. And you do want upside, but you have to mitigate that with some floor because you don't want to not get it. That's the key. And there's been times I didn't get in planning. And it's not a good feeling. You want some return on that investment when you're laying out that kind of capital. And again, you roll the dice on some risky players, but I don't think it's as much a focus as just putting an all-around balanced, good team that'll get you in the hunt. And then, you got to be 3 guys.
You mentioned earlier that when you're going through your picks and you might see a player that you think is being overdrafted, that you fade them. Now, are there at times or seasons where you may fade an entire offense, or when you're doing volume, like, 50, 60, 70 teams, do you think that's just too much of a risk when you're playing high volume?
You know what? I don't think I ever focus on fading a team. There's been some really awful teams that have had some tremendous fantasy players. We mentioned one earlier,
Yep.
Detroit, how many wins do they have? A couple of wins. They looked a little better at the end of the season, but they had a couple tremendous fantasy players. They, early on before he got hurt, Swift was, a solid week in, week out. He could get you 20 points week in, week out. If you're fading that team, you're not getting him in the 4th round. It's crazy to fade an entire team. And if you're fading an entire team, you're not picking up St. Brown at the end of the season who turned out to be, one of the fair pickups of the year. The way he
wide
played.
receiver one down the stretch.
During the fantasy playoffs, the most important time. And if you were able to grab him, but if you're looking at Detroit as a fantasy wasteland, you're not even going near him. I mean, my Jets, I mean, you're a San Francisco fan, so, but I'm a Jet fan. So, I know pain. I know bad teams. They've been an offensive wasteland. They weren't a good offensive team this year at all. But, there's been stretches when Elijah Moore looked like, a solid week in, week out fantasy player, and you would plug him in until he got hurt. He was making that step, and that was on an awful, and I can tell you firsthand, awful football team. But so you can find diamonds anywhere. You just gotta keep your eyes open, and if you're fading a team and you have your eyes closed, you won't see them.
All right. What are the differences in your strategy for volume versus somebody who may be starting off inside high stakes, who may be looking to do 1, 2, maybe 3 leagues? How are you going to differentiate a strategy for the low volume player versus someone like yourself who's doing 50, 60, 70 of these?
Well, I think if I were a low volume player, and there was a time I was, it goes back to when I only played my home leagues, or early on in high stakes. I think you make a more of an effort to get the guys you believe in. If you're playing 50, 60, 70 leagues, or in Hubbard's case,
1,000.
Case, 1,000. You're going to get your share of your guys. You're going to have the team. You're going to have plenty of exposure to, your favorite running back, your sleeper running back, your favorite wide receiver, your go-to tight end. You're gonna get them because you're gonna have them rated a little bit higher than everybody else. So you're gonna get your share if you're doing that kind of volume. If you're doing 2 or 3 leagues or 1 league, I think it's more important to maybe jump a little higher. You want to get those guys you truly believe in. You want to go to war with the guys you truly believe in. If I had one team, I would make sure, within reason, I got the guys I truly believed in. I was willing to wait on Swift, as he dragged down the draft board and started going down. I followed him down. I would, if I could get him in the 4th, I wasn't picking him in the 3rd. If I had one team, I would pick him where I thought he was worth. I'd look at ADP and see he was in the 3rd. And if I had an early 3rd round pick, I wasn't rolling the dice to see if he came back to me in the 4th. There were plenty of times with the volume I had that I passed on him in the 3rd because, hey, I got a lot of him anyway. Let's see if he makes it down to the 4th. And when he did, or if he did, I would scoop him up there. You can't really play those games as much if you've got 1 team, 2 teams, 3 teams. Get you guys.
Okay, love it. Speaking of getting your guys, so Swift was your guy. Is there a percent that you will say, hey, I own too much of this player, I'm going to start fading him just to diversify my portfolio for you? Or are you just, I don't care if I own 40, 50% of this player? Or at what point do you, cut the cord and say, enough's enough, I can't take any more of this player?
It depends how much I believe in the guy. You know what? I actually think that might be a weakness of mine. Players have strengths and weaknesses, and you try to evaluate both for yourself. And I think one of my weaknesses is when I believe in a guy, I'm all in. If I've got 70 teams and I've got him on 69 of them, I'm wondering why I missed him on the 1. I had close to 60% exposure on Swift. I believed in him that much. I was getting him everywhere. As he fell down the board, I followed him down the board and was getting him even more. And I loved it, and I had no problem with it. But there were other players like that, not quite 60%. He was my biggest exposure by far. But I had other players like that who ended up getting hurt. Yeah. And when that happens, listen, football's a violent sport. And, there's a lot of injuries. And there's more injuries now than there's ever been. And then you throw in the COVID factor. If that bad luck hits your players and you're exposed as much as I'm willing to be at times, it can be a death sentence. And not just for one or two teams, it can be a death sentence across the board. And, I've always played that way. The hell with it. I'm going from my guys. If he's there, I'm grabbing. I don't care if I have 9 of them and it's the 10th league, I'm taking him again. This year it really bit me in the ass for a few players. And, it's got me thinking and, again, decompressing and then evaluating yourself.
Better in the process.
Thinking, a lot of very, very smart fantasy players, a lot of guys I respect, are very much about, having a more diversified portfolio. Stocks,
it is stocks. Yeah.
It's stocks. And, maybe that's the smarter play. Again, if you hit on the guy and you guys stay healthy, I've had some monster seasons, where that kind of thing happened, and I profited tremendously, across the board. But, this is one of those years that it didn't work out for me, even with Swift. When Swift went down.
Yep, 60%, you're 60%, down.
60%, I'm looking for a running back on 60% of my teams, It hurt. And, that happened to me for a few players this year. And it's got me thinking if that risk, especially in the climate we're in now with sports, with the added COVID factor and, the added games where coaches might be more willing to rest a player, and the added injuries, because again, extra games, bigger players, faster players crashing into each other at 100 miles an hour. There's so many injuries now that maybe just taking a little bit of that risk away might be the smarter play.
Now, would that risk reduce for you if let's say that player is like a player that comes to mind for me as someone I had about 50% of was Gabe Davis in the beginning of the season, who I thought was going to be what he's been turned out to be in the playoffs,
yes.
But dropped him throughout the year because you had to. And you look at something like that cost-based analysis and say, hey, I had 50% of him, but he was taking him in around 13, 12, 14 at times. Is that when you're willing to own more of a player, or does the round association have zero factor for you?
I think that the round association does play a factor. Again, there's a value to the 13th round that's much, much less than your second round player. So,
correct.
You lose your second round player on 50% of your teams, it's going to be tough to bounce back from that. You lose your 13th round player, especially, let's face it, those rounds, it's tough to find the hits. You feel really good when you find that 13th round home run. I mean, if we all look at our drafts and the back half, the double digit rounds, that 8 of them are anything but kicker and defense, right? I guarantee a lot of us have a tremendous amount of turnover in those rounds. So that's kind of like built into those rounds already. So, if 50% of them you're giving up on Gabe Davis, who's a player I liked a lot back then as well. Hey, if you pick somebody else, you were probably turning them over anyway. Now, if you picked a second round player across the board, you were picking them over maybe Jonathan Taylor. That's a different cost to both, your draft capital and your season. So
it's a bigger dagger too when you got to pull it out of the pain when
no
you
doubt.
know that you passed on JT and picked up somebody like Clyde Edwards-Helaire or something like that.
Exactly.
So we were kind of on the topic of I was going to wait to the end, but Jose's been patient. He had a couple questions here, and it was also on the sheet to ask later. But if you can give advice for someone who wants to start drafting in high stakes, since we were talking about leagues and we were talking about 1 team, 2 team, 3 team, it kind of ties into what we're talking about now. What is one of the best pieces of advice you can give someone that's wanting to draft in high stakes?
Well, the number one thing is kind of obvious. If you haven't played high stakes before and you've been a home league player or maybe an ESPN free or low cost player, that kind of a player, and you've done very well, you have to understand most of the players, the vast majority of the players that play in high stakes and make the investments that they do in hard-earned money, to join these leagues, they're not doing it on a whim. They're doing it because they're very, very good players and they're planning on winning. And they're basing that confidence to put up that money because they've won before. You're not playing against your home league. The 11 guys who get together with you, on a Sunday, Labor Day weekend over some beers, and the guys you've beaten every year. Okay. You're playing the guys that beat their home leagues every year and then went into bigger leagues and beat all those winners of the home leagues every year. And as you move up, you have better and better players that have beaten everybody else along the line. It's tremendous players. They know everything, but it's not only the innate abilities. They work harder than everybody. The best players are the ones that put in the most work. They read everything. They follow everything. They research. They look for every single detail. I know players, tremendous players, very successful players that watch every single game, every single play from the Sunday before the next Thursday comes, so they can make the decisions that they have to make.
I love film.
It's film, it's websites, it's analysis, it's breaking down numbers. There's a tremendous amount of information out there now. Back when I started in high stakes, there wasn't quite as much information. So if you worked harder than everybody else, you had an edge. If you could dig out that information that made a difference, you could create an edge. Now everything's so easily accessible. There's so many smart people putting out information right now. There's so much access to film and that you can study on your own. And the coaches, the analysts, the reporters, everybody's throwing out everything. Now it's the ability to read it all and decipher what means something. And there are people out there that are spending a tremendous amount of hours and time going through all that so they can be better than the next guy. And so put in the work. Number one, don't plan on it being home league. Put in the work.
Hence the name of the show, Grind Time, right? We're here to grind it out. We're here to walk through the process of the high stakes meetings. Why we have players like Glenn on. It's why we have other winners on, because we want to understand their process. We want to show what it is and what it entails. Like I was DMing a guy who was talking to me about high stakes. Can't remember the guy's name. It was one of our only interactions on Twitter, and he was asking about what it took in order to play in high stakes and be successful. And I asked him first, what type of buy-ins he was looking at and just to get a feel for him, to point him in the right directions, and what kind of contest he should be entering and what type of, time he wanted to invest it into this. And he said, well, I don't want it to be a second job. And I'm thinking immediately like, well, that's what high stakes is. Like, if you don't come here at this thinking that, if you think you're going to come in here and just set your lineup on, Thursday and then check it on Sunday morning before and go, you're going to lose. You're going to be the rake. But if you are the guy that's going to be grinding waivers, like Dave Hubbard is grinding the waiver wires as games are going on and adding players live during games and adjusting them as games are ending, and then coming back through and setting lineups multiple times a week, checking news, tweaking things, those are the type of players that are successful. Those are the type of players, like Glenn just said, they're the ones hustling. They're the ones that are outperforming everyone because they're putting in the time and energy. The only other thing I would say that I would give people, I agree with everything Glenn said. The only thing I would like to add on there is I personally believe in creating rankings, whether that is a tier-based ranking system or it is a draft sheet, whatever it may be. You need to have some sort of personalized preferences when you enter a draft room. Don't take the draft room's ADP or a website's ADP. Similar to what Glenn said, get your guys. Well, I believe in getting my guys, but also having some sort of statistical breakdown of it and saying, why are they my guys, and having them in tiers, right? So easily JT's, tier 1 running back in 2022. Well, who's going to be tier 2? Who's going to be your tier 3? And then separating those guys. And as you see the draft board unfolds, you may start seeing people in your tier 3 going off the board, but you still have one of your two guys on the board. And at that point, you're going to be able to get what you consider a value, and you're still getting one of your guys. So kind of a combination of what Glenn was saying earlier, as well as one of my things I'd like to give new high stakes players advice on. Well, let's move on to in-season process here. Walk me through your typical week. So we're talking about the grind. We're talking about the hustle. Perfect time to transition here. Walk me through your grind and your hustle. What does your week entail and when does it start?
Well, Sundays, that's the best day. You're watching the games, you're watching how your teams are doing, and both the teams you're watching and your fantasy teams, and you're enjoying football. But the whole time you're watching. And, I watch every game. I might not watch every play of every game, but I watch a lot of the games. And, you're always analyzing, you're always thinking as much as you're enjoying the game. And, we talked earlier about the playoff games, right? I'm watching the players as well, thinking about next year,
Exactly.
Even though I'm in decompress mode and everything, you can't, as a high stakes fantasy player, someone as passionate as we are about this hobby or job, as we called it earlier, you can't watch it without thinking about how it affects what you do and the players that can make an impact next year. Is there anybody who watched Buffalo, KC, who didn't look at Gabe Davis and start thinking about where he'd be going? What kind is this a transition to him being more of a go-to type receiver for Josh Allen and where he's going to fall? I took a look. I watch Twitter here and there, and I saw somebody post a best ball draft, and I took a quick look at it. It's an early draft. There's a lot of things, free agency draft, the NFL draft, a lot of things that are going to change along the line. But one of the things I noticed, that Gabe Davis went in the 6th round. Now, let me ask you a question. Is
Go
Gabe
for it.
going in the 6th round last Friday?
No
way, right?
No.
So these games that are happening now that, unless you have a playoff contest, aren't affecting your fantasy teams. We're already analyzing the impact to our teams next year. And, so it starts on Sunday. Just the thought process, the thinking things through, seeing and analyzing. Monday, you start putting it together in your head. You start seeing how teams came out of it. Your fantasy teams, you still got Monday, so you still got that great game to go. But you're starting to already plan for next week. The players that you want to pick up, the teams that need certain type of holes filled, and the players available that can do it. Tuesday for me, I come home from work, I eat dinner, and Fab is on. It's all night Fab. Not all night. Eventually I go to sleep, but it's all from the minute I get home and eat. I spend a little time with the kids. I'm not a bad father. I spend a lot of time, but I'm working on Tuesday nights. It's not as stressful as Wednesdays because you don't have that deadline hanging over your head. But the last thing you want to do is have teams that you didn't have time to get to. So you're working on at that point. I'm starting to fill out, Fab pickups for each team. I'll pick one contest, go through every team in that contest. Eventually call it a night. Wednesday, that's the big rush. Wednesday, it's a funny thing. Tuesday, I put in all that work, but whatever teams I did on Tuesday, I'm double checking on Wednesday, making changes. It's crazy. And then, finishing up, and then, 10 o'clock comes and you're checking every single pickup you got and how it affects your team and what you can do with it. I'm already starting lineups for Thursday. Thursday's game comes, I'm already thinking about pickups for Saturday. So, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday morning, now that some of these deadlines have moved closer to game day, it's great because there's more news you can take in. But as far as the work, it extends the work. Is there any of us that have that Sunday deadline for our leagues that aren't making moves Sunday? It's not setting up Fab Sunday morning for some of these teams. And then 10 o'clock Sunday comes, and the pickups are in, and now you got to check your lineups again. So it's a process that goes around and around. It's a full-time job. Ever since the Thursday night game became institutional, week in, week out, it really changed fantasy football. It changed because of the Wednesday Fab. It changed it from, you had some breathing room during the week to, no, it's your second job. You really have to focus on it if you're going to win. Try to get some balance in your life, but if you want to be successful, make sure you do the work that's necessary week in and week out for now 18 weeks a season. So
we have, leading into my next question here, I'm going to have here, how do you budget your waiver wire funds, and who was your best waiver wire pickup ever made?
Ever made? That's a tough one. I remember picking up Tyreek Hill a lot. I remember picking up Stephon Diggs. Guys like that. You're gonna find those guys, and they're gonna be league winners sometimes. Odell Beckham probably 2014. If you didn't have him, you weren't winning, and he was on waiver wires a lot that season.
He started the year off with a bad hammy.
He started the year off. People were questioning him. There was, some criticism from the coaching staff, from the media. I had actually drafted him on a team and dropped him. And a week or two before he was supposed to come back, I picked him up again for $1. So it was $1 pickup. He helped carry me that to a strong finish in the NFC primetime. Could have won that, but fell a little short. But he was a big reason, and he was probably my best pickup. As far as budgeting for waiver wire, I know a lot of people. Your partner, he's famous for it. Like to spend early. That hot guy's there. He could be a league winner. Let me grab him. He'll have the most impact on the most games. I get that theory. I do hate being short fab at the end of the season. Again, we hit upon the fact that this is such a violent, tough sport. You got COVID. You got so many things that affect your team during the course of the season. I like having some fab to have that ability to adjust when needed. We talked about flexibility. Fab gives you some flexibility. So I'm not big on that, first game, second game, big $600, $700 play. I didn't win Elijah Mitchell in one league when he was available. I drafted him a bunch. I had him a lot as 19th and 20th round picks.
Then dropped him before week one.
I kept him on about, I probably had 30% exposure, I'm going to say, during the draft season, and I probably kept about half of that. So I did have him on some teams, and he helped. He got injured along the way too, and he had empty patches. But he was definitely great when he played. But when he was available for the teams, he was available on for me when people were paying $900, $800. I wasn't doing that. It's not really my style. I like to have fab for the rest of the season.
Okay. List 3 mistakes you see managers make in the season on an annual basis.
I'd say first off, we talked about not working hard enough, but part of that is not looking into the reasons things happen. I see a lot of fab. We talked about fab being spent. And probably the biggest mistake I see is fab being spent on chasing stats. It's something that said a lot in our circles. Last week's stats are already in the books. You can't get them. So you got to look at the process and see how that happened. Is it a one-off, or is it a something that you can expect and depend upon it continuing. I think that's probably the biggest mistake. I love drafting the Friday, Saturday, Sunday after the first Thursday night game. There's so much overreaction to that game. Yeah, sometimes it plays out. Sometimes it's great. It's funny, but it can create real values. The year I won the FFWC, I had drafted before that team that won. I had drafted before that Thursday night game, and I got Peyton Manning, I think, in the 4th round or 5th round or something like that, which is about where he belonged at that time, I thought. He had that monster first week. That was the year he had 50 touchdowns or whatever, and he started off like gangbusters. The Broncos just dominated that Thursday night, and he was going in the first round after that. I loved it. I wasn't chasing him in the first round. I already had my shares of him in the 5th round, let everybody else overpay for him, which wasn't an overpay. He ended up being worth the first rounder. But those people who drafted him in the first round now have a significant disadvantage to me, because I got him in the 5th round, and I'm able to add a first-round talent pre-draft to him, which ended up being Jamal Charles. So nobody
not a bad player.
Yeah, and that was the year he had the monster playoff run. So I was able to combine Jamal Charles with Peyton Manning. Who's doing that? Taking Peyton Manning in the first. You're out of that possibility. So, overreacting to stats, pushing people too up or paying too much fab because of 1 week. I always try to stay away from that, and that's something I would recommend to anybody new to high stakes.
All great advice. This will kind of work into that question, but when you in these tournaments and you have rosters lock as we get into playoffs, how many defenses are you carrying? How do you approach playoffs with fab and with your roster requirements and positional players? Are you carrying 2 defenses? Are you carrying 2 quarterbacks? We already know we're not carrying 2 kickers, but kind of walk me through your process when you enter playoffs and what you're comfortable carrying heading in.
Depends on the team. Okay. First of all, if you're putting together a roster early in the season, the back end of your roster should always have, those league winning, shots you're taking, the backup running backs, the upside wide receivers that, if they get their opportunity, if the frontline running back goes down, he's a league winner type, the Pollards, the Dillons, guys like that. That should be the back half of your roster. Even if you're not using them, you don't need to worry about bye weeks early, things like that. Fill that up with upside plays, okay? You get to the playoffs, that's not as important. I mean, it's still great if you have a guy like that in there. But you should now worry about depth, because if you play, I'll play the whole season with 1 quarterback, but if you lose that quarterback, week 6, you got fab week 7. Hopefully there's somebody decent out there. A lot of teams are playing 1 quarterback. So maybe you can get a bridge quarterback for a while and, keep you alive. You have 1 quarterback and he goes down, and it happened to me this year, Lamar Jackson. For a couple teams I really liked, Lamar Jackson went down. He was my only quarterback. I think it might have been the week before the season, but fab was over already. And I didn't have him, and I couldn't do anything about it. So
team's dead in the water.
I'm dead in the water. There's nothing I can do. He's gone. I didn't see it coming. I rolled the dice, and I've done that before and survived it. This year I didn't. And so you want to have that backup quarterback. Listen, you lose Lamar Jackson, and he helped get you there. You're going to need a little bit of luck to survive that anyway. But you got a chance if you've got a backup quarterback. The same thing with kicker, unless there's team kicker. Okay? You don't want to lose an overall championship because Greg Zuerlein, was out for a week, and that 1 week you didn't get the 6, 7, 8 points you could have gotten from a backup, and you lose and overall by 7 points, which I've done before. Not the kicker way, but I've lost by that close. And you don't want it to be because you didn't have a backup kicker in the FFPC. Now it's not as much of an issue where you have team kicker, but if you still have the individual player, defense, it all depends on the defense you have. You have a rock solid killer defense that's matchup proof. There's not a lot of them, but if you have that kind of a defense, I won't waste a spot on the second defense. But if you don't, you look at matchups, try to figure out those three games, and get two defenses that give you a decent matchup over those three. I won't carry more than that, but I've carried two defenses, I've carried two kickers, I've carried two quarterbacks into the playoffs, but I've also rolled the dice at times and went naked, and most of the time survived, but occasionally didn't. So
last question I have before we start dip into some more of these listener questions, and then just some random questions to tie it all together. But what is your opinion on dropping players as the season begins? How soon is too soon to cut an underperforming player?
Depends how they turn out, right?
Yeah.
That's a tough call. The first few weeks, you don't have bye weeks. You have a little bit more flexibility. You got a little bit more depth that you don't need to play with. And you're taking shots at some players in the draft. I'd probably try to hold on to them unless, there's somebody out there I really like, that I have to jump on, and I have to drop somebody. Come bye weeks, you got to fill the holes. You got a few injuries, you got a bye week. You got a Rashad Penny, you like him, but yeah, he's hurt again. You drop him. You do what you got to do to get past the week. Rashad Penny's a funny guy. I had him on probably every single one of my teams at one point in the season. I'm just one of those guys that, keep looking at Rashad Penny's upside.
Can't quit
him. I was like that with Watkins forever and Josh Gordon forever. But, he's just one of those guys that I always thought if he did hit, again, I'm an upside guy, roll the dice, it would be a monster. And, but I dropped him when I needed to, and he was up and down. He was up and down on my team. Sometimes he was up and down 2-3 times. I got guys like that I drop and then they pick up, drop and then they pick up. I'm on St. Brown. I had him, and sometime in the middle of the season, I bid decent amount for him. I grabbed him on a ton of teams, and then all of a sudden, Josh Reynolds had a good game.
Yeah,
I'm like, I'm on sucks. The Detroit sucks. They can't support two wide receivers. I'm dumping them. Look what happened. So it depends how it works out. You have to take chances. You got to go by feel. A lot of these players are how you feel about it. I mentioned Watkins forever, year after year. I just couldn't get away from him. And Penny. If I held on to him on a bunch of teams, some of those teams might have turned out a little bit different. Once he started playing and performing and putting up points like crazy. But I held on to him on a few teams. It depended how the teams were constructed at the time, what their needs were. So,
Rashad Penny also has another very funny, I should say, not even necessarily funny, but he's got another like contingency, and that's Pete Carroll, right? And
yes.
Is Pete Carroll gonna use him? Is he really gonna follow through with what he says he's gonna do? And that in itself was a gamble. Hey, what is Pete Carroll even gonna? How is he gonna roll out Collins? Is he gonna roll out just this mess of the backfield? And so if in hindsight, knowing that he actually was going to commit to him, I think every one of us would have held on to him. But it's very true. It's hard to tell with each player, and the ones you let go always sting. Scott has. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What you want to do is have those players on your team as much as possible. Those upside type of players. So if they do hit at any particular time, hey, you had them on your team at this point, and it turns out to be a home run. Sometimes you got rid of them a week or two too soon because you had to. It's the game.
So we have a couple couple more listener questions here before we finalize. Scott says, I know you and your son love football cards. FFWC tried integrating the two this past season. Did you enjoy that? And would you like to see more similar integrations between fantasy and trading cards?
I love it mostly for my son. He loves football cards. He loves fantasy. So, when that was introduced, it was something that we really got to enjoy together. I joined a league and I'd be on the wheel, and me and him would sit around the wheel, and he'd be rooting for it. I'd shoot him a little text during the day. He'd be at school or something, or out with his friends or whatever. I shoot him a little text. Hey, there's a draft today. Daniel Jones's rookie card is available, and I get back instantly in capital. Join. Make sure you join. So it was great. It was a great thing. I love enjoying the fantasy hobby with my son. It's something we've done for several years now, and it just adding the football cards did make it even more enjoyable. It enhanced it exponentially, because it added the wheel and that portion of it, and it was something great. And he did win a couple cards, and one great guy who won it, heard that my son was a Giants fan and really was hoping to get the Daniel Jones card, and he actually reached out to me and gave the card to my son.
That's awesome.
It was an unbelievably generous and kind move. Great community fantasy football players, by the way.
Yes, it is.
Great people. But it's something, when you get to enjoy something like this, a hobby that you love and are passionate about, like fantasy football, with your son, it's great. And anything like football cards that enhances it and enhances his enjoyment of it, enhances my enjoyment of it. So I'm all for it.
So one of the first drafts that I saw, the cards kind of come out live, and it was a Kyler Murray card, and I missed like the memo. They were giving away the card, right? And I'm like, why is this guy taking a defense this early? This kicker, this guy loves the Cardinals. And I'm sitting there just laughing at this build, and then I realized, oh, they're giving away the card. You get extra points.
Yes.
And I was sitting over here just like critiquing this build like there was, no tomorrow. And then I realized, oh, this guy's going to win the card.
It's so funny. When the first one we did was Jerry Judy, and there's my son telling me to pick KJ Hamler in the 10th round. I'm like, I'm not doing that.
It definitely creates some unique builds, and it definitely changes the board. It's kind of, that's the part I enjoyed the most, was kind of seeing how soon do people go, right? And how much is it going to stir the pot? That was the fun part.
It definitely made it more fun. It added to the fun, no question.
Last question we have here, I think. Let me just double check. And this one was one from earlier that I was holding off. Let me find it here. Boom, here it is. What is the one thing you would change in fantasy? As in, what's your one thing you think needs to be adapted?
What is the one thing you would change? Oh, man. That's a tough one, honestly, because I do love this hobby tremendously. I think a lot of changes that have been incorporated over the last couple of years, and I think a lot of it was, caused by COVID or generated by COVID, have helped the hobby. Even though I said it created more work, I think the later fad deadlines are a benefit. You have the opportunity for more news, more information. When you have the investments that we make, that's always important. Takes luck a little bit out of the game. Team kicker is another one that I think is a tremendous benefit. But overall, I think the hobby is pretty great. There's a lot of good high stakes national contests out there, and they're all a little bit different. They all have a little bit different rules that I think make each one unique and each one fun in its own way. And fun is so important. If you're not having fun doing this, find a new hobby. To me, this is, I've had some success. I readily admit I've had very good years, and I'm very proud of the success I have had. But I wouldn't play this if it wasn't fun. I love it. I love it, and I love the contests that I do play, and the players I play with. So I don't think there's too much that I would change in high stakes fantasy or fantasy. It's always going to be an evolving game, and there's going to be little tinkers that come here and there that help it. But there's nothing that comes to mind right away that I think has to be done. Nothing dramatic or crazy kind of change that's needed.
All right, I lied. There's one more question I missed. Curious to see how many high stakes teams you'd advise someone who wants to make the jump. So
How many they should have?
Yeah, new player into high stakes. What should be their max in teams?
When I joined, I actually joined the first high stakes I did was fantasy baseball, and let me tell you, that's work. And you think football's work, fantasy baseball takes it to another level. But I didn't have a lot of teams. I had, I think, 4 fantasy baseball teams, and then when the fantasy football season came around, I probably had, I'd say, 10 or less. And I did pretty well with that number. And so based on my experience, I would say that's probably a good max. I wouldn't go too much. You're going to be learning a lot, your first year. You're going to be, digesting a lot. It's a different game, the high stakes level. You don't want to invest too much on a learning curve. You may do great out of the bat, who knows, but you may struggle. So, I would treat the first year, maybe, play a little conservative as far as entries, anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe. I mean, if you really have the time, maybe you hit 10, but I would say that's max. I wouldn't recommend hitting what I did last year or some of these other players can do. They've got a lot of experience with it, and learn the game, and then you'll realize organically what your ceiling is on leagues. You'll move up every year until you hit that ceiling.
I like what Stats Guru says here. Players can take steps in FFWC. You can win a starter league. Then from there, you can earn an online championship league. And then you can win and get a free entry into the World Championship main event. So if you are trying to, ease your feet in, or, get used to the waters first, this might be one of the best ways to do it. Learn the rules. You don't have to invest as much in, right? I wouldn't consider the first steps high stakes, but at least it's a chance for you to kind of dabble in the league settings, learn the rules, and kind of understand the system. And then from there, you can decide how many you want to do the following year as well. But I'm going to say like 3 to 5, probably, if I'm going to recommend to people their first year. Just gives you a chance to, you win one, you're pretty much going to break even, or if not be positive, depending upon what type of league you're joining or where it may be. But at least you have a chance to be positive, winning 1 of 3. You should be, to be profitable, you want to win more than that. But as a new player, if people are joining and starting to do this, I think that's a good place for people to start as well.
And I like what that note was as well, because there's something to be said with playing with house money.
Yes.
So win your league. I didn't start playing the platinum or the high society or the FFWC Top Gun or any of that. That wasn't the way I walked into these leagues. I won, and when I won, I expanded and played a little bit more high stake leagues. And
he's saying he used your money to play those next leagues.
100%. Use everybody else's money if you can. If you can,
absolutely.
It's a lot better. It's a lot easier. It's a lot more fun moving up to a $1,500 league or a 5K league or a 10K league if you're using the money that you won for the previous year.
Well, I kept you much longer than I initially told you, so I just want to say, Glenn, thank you for coming on. It was an honor to get your insight in the high stakes contests, your process. your preseason process, your in-season process. So thank you for taking the time, and also thank you for being open about that process and sharing it with our listeners.
No problem, Billy. Fantasy football is a passion of mine. I love talking about it. I love talking with other fantasy football players who are just as passionate as me. It was a pleasure for me as well.
And everyone who's still live, next week we'll be back. I'm going to be joined by another high stakes analyst, as well as high stakes player who's also been successful. Somebody else that we might know the name, Nelson Sousa, is going to be joining us. And so if you want some more tips and tricks as well to hear another player's thought process, because we all do things differently, right? There's more than one way to skin a cat. So if you want to tune in that one, we'll be back next week. I'll update times as we get closer. But thanks for tuning in tonight to Grind Time, powered by Full Time Fantasy and the FFWC. And before I hang up, a reminder, you can still get into Maui Madness. So you still have a couple. You got this week and next week. It's a 2-week contest. So 2 highest scores are in there. So head on over to FFWC, enter in your Maui Madness, and get your divisional matches entered. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a good night.